So welcome. We are here to talk about underwriting, which is obviously a critical part of the insurance journey and is something that is having to transform by necessity in a world where risks are pivoting and changing in all shapes and sizes, literally day to day. And new products are coming to market, and new organizations that are selling those products are showing up. So I'd like to take an opportunity. We'll start off some introductions. My name is Meredith Barnes-Cook. I am a partner in the Transformation Services organization at Resource Pro.
My name is William Steenbergen. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Federado.
Fantastic. And thank you again for your sponsorship of our event and joining us today. So William, let's level set on AI. From your vantage point, from what you're seeing, how much has AI impacted underwriting thus far, and where do you see the future of the technology over the next several years?
Yeah, quite a bit, and it's obviously increasing a lot. One of the kind of classic examples of where AI is used right now is usually where it normally starts, right? It's efficiency, right? How do we automate some of the processes that underwriters are doing today to help them get back to underwriting again, right? And I think that's a very natural place to start. It comes into submission intake, right? Keying in information, automating generation of documents, all those sorts of things. And I think that's really valuable. But it's definitely not going to stop there, right? There's a couple of reasons that I think after efficiency, you then have to actually start focusing on quality, right? How do we improve the quality of underwriting? And especially with a lot of senior underwriters, senior folks in the industry retiring as we go, a lot of that knowledge starts disappearing. And I think what's really interesting that we've seen over the last couple of years is with the upcoming of these LLMs, right, which are basically models to capture a knowledge base, right? Capturing that knowledge base of all these senior underwriters will start to be really, really important. And actually, you'll be able to use those models then to feed back that information to more junior folks, right? So that's kind of one way you can apply the quality, or you can use AI to generate some of that quality, or at least keep the quality that is currently in the heads of your senior folks, right? So I think we're going to see a little bit of a transition from efficiency and just cost reduction to underwriting performance, and be more specific on that, because we like to joke. Sometimes we speak to some of our customers, and they're very focused on, okay, we just need to get more deals done, right? And that's great. But if all of those deals are out of appetite and you're now accumulating a big area in your portfolio, well, great that you got your hit ratio up, but that might not always be a good thing, right? So I think that quality aspect is really important as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that whole talent perspective, is really key, because again, you keep hearing from us, and you're living it. The impending and slowly increasing talent crisis as your more tenured underwriters are maturing out and becoming retirement eligible, and the challenge of attracting that next generation of workers into the insurance industry as a whole, not to mention the underwriting organization. So level setting, Resource Pro, we do 25 to 30 research reports a year, and some of them we do every year to keep a pulse on what's happening in the industry. And one of the ones that we do every year is what we call the strategic initiatives research. And we do this across the carriers, agents, as well as MGA segments to reach out and say, for the coming year, what's going to be driving your investment in technology? What are your strategic priorities, your initiatives? What's keeping you up at night? And because it's really helpful, it lets us see year over year how things are shifting. And so for 2024, for carriers, both for those that are focused on the small segment as well as mid to large, what we saw was, in face of economic headwinds, it became business prioritization. 90%, this is where we're all in as our number one priority. It shot up the continuum across the board. And that was kind of interesting. But then you reflect on the times and you go, that makes sense. And we ask again this year, what are you focused on? What are you worried about? And again, business prioritization, business optimization is still at the top. But what was interesting when we saw rally back up was growth and innovation. So they're in this mindset of, we'd like to have it all, please. which it's possible, but this is part, why we wanted to have William be part of this conversation, because it does require carriers to think differently, to operate differently, and to make decisions differently, to manage their portfolio differently. It just requires change to be able to satisfy those key initiatives. Some of the other trends that we saw, last year we saw the carriers focused on the small commercial segment. They start looking at, there's this hybrid scenario where they look a little bit like their personal lines peers to some extent. And one of those things was about leveraging data and pricing optimization. What we saw this year was mid-large said us too. So kind of everything's kind of, the continuum is moving. The pressure points that maybe start off in those small, simple risks are moving up market, and presumably you're all seeing that. And with that comes both the challenge, opportunity, chaos of data. What data do you use to drive those decisions? What data do you actually already have and maybe haven't necessarily tapped into it in a different way? What is the data that you have? You'd be like, just don't worry about that right now, because if you try to normalize it all, having been part of one of those journeys, respectfully, I don't know if you'll ever get there. It's like a never-ending journey. You have to kind of really focus on what's the data you need. And then there's third-party data. Every time you turn around, here comes another one. There's more third-party data sources than you can swing a cat at. I shouldn't say that, I'm a cat owner. They won't appreciate that. I don't swing my cats, I promise. But the challenge is, if you don't know specifically what type of data you need for what risk, for what decision, for what line of business, and how much of it and what it's worth to you to have it. And do you need data to put into your own modeling capabilities, your own analysis? Or do you actually want someone who will do all that and score things for you until you know what you need? That's kind of the vegetables before you can have the dessert, where you can actually start going to market and looking. And I see some friendly faces from CNA at the table, one of the round tables, and I heard this a lot during the round tables. You're all getting barraged with phone calls. Have I got a great solution for you? And respectfully, you should be saying, what problem would you solve for me? Because it's about solving problems. It's not giving you data. Data is the how, it's not the what. So it's a really exciting space. But completely respect and appreciate it's a little overwhelming right about now. So we want to dig deeper into underwriting as a whole, and let's talk about portfolio management and your view and vision experience. Why is this so important?
Yeah, and to kind of start, I wanted to jump on some of the things you said there as well. You kind of asked the question, well, hey, there's a lot of data. How do I figure out what data I need, right? And the framework that we have started thinking about and have been working with our carriers and MGAs on is this framework of appetite and winnability. So ultimately, you want your underwriters to, when they wake up, they start their day, they're drinking their cup of coffee, and they have 3 hours without meetings, and they can start underwriting, right? You want them to focus on submissions that are in appetite, right? You want to win them. They're going to help you diversify your portfolio or just good risks, right? And high winnability, right? If I spend my time on this, I actually can win them. For us, those things are independent, right? Whether something is winnable isn't affected by whether you want to win it, right? So that's kind of the idea and the submissions that you want to start with. And so when you're getting a data and you're thinking about it, match that to one of those two, right? Is this going to help me understand better whether this is in appetite or not, right? Do I care about this? Do I want to win these sorts of things, right? Or is this going to help me predict better, can I win this, right? And I think those are the really interesting things that we capture a lot. What we found, and this probably is not going to surprise anyone in the room here, that winnability often is really well predicted by relationship type data, right? Underwriting is still a very relationship-driven business. And so often the things that you're going to care about when you're predicting, hey, am I going to be able to win this or not, is things like, how fast did the broker get back to me? How many words did they use in your email? How many times have I connected with them or have I had dinner with them? Like, those are the sorts of things that actually we have seen being real predictive, have real predictive power over winnability, right? And so that sort of relationship type data is really, really helpful to start capturing, right? So think about that. And then appetite-wise, that is going to be purely dependent on your guidelines, right? Your underwriting guidelines, your strategies, right? Go through those, figure out what are the data points actually mentioned in this document, right? That I want underwriters to focus on. That's the thing I need to capture. And what you'll find is that as underwriters are focusing on those high winnability, high appetite submissions first, what's really interesting, if you do those first, your winnability goes up, because if you're the first one to quote something, you're going to have a much higher chance of winning it, right? So now you're actually not just focused on ones that were already high winnability and were already really in appetite. You're also increasing your rate of winning because you're doing them first. And that doesn't mean you have to, right? Some of our carriers say, well, I'm already getting to all my submissions. Why would I try to make that more efficient? Well, it matters what order you get into them, right? The order that your underwriters work on these things actually matters for your winnability, right? So still, like that sort of concept, I think is really important. That's the framework we use to figure out why is this data so important. Now, to answer your question around portfolio and why is it so important, as I said, efficiency is going to go up, right? We're going to be more efficient. I see that everywhere, right? Hit ratios are going up, time to quote is going down. Everybody is getting better, right? And that's great. But it also makes it easier to drive yourself to the wrong portfolio, right? The faster you go, the shorter of a time period you have to change your strategy and notice it, right? Monitor it, and then actually change something. And so it's great if you can go faster, but with going faster, you have to be more precise, right? And you have to be more often, more frequently thinking about your portfolio, where are my underwriters taking me here, to actually make a change. And so I think that's why portfolio management and thinking not just about getting more efficient, but actually thinking about appetite and what do I want to win is so incredibly important.
And I think there's that relationship, right? If you're managing your portfolio like near real time type of thing and seeing something happen in your portfolio, being able to say, hold on, what does this mean about my appetite? Like for the next one that's coming in the door, do I suddenly think differently? Or do I suddenly want something that I previously told my distribution partners don't send me? Because there's that piece as well, because there's that whole communication out to the entities that may be bringing you business, that they need to be following you as you pivot. I talked to another solution provider who said that, from their research, it can sometimes take weeks or months for a distribution partner to know when appetites are moving within a carrier. And I went, oh, yikes. Yeah. I understand it's hard, but like, ouch.
And it's so important to be clear about that, right? Like one of the values that we see, that quick no from an underwriter is so important because the underwriter's not wasting your time. You're providing a lot of clarity to your brokers. Hey, this is not of interest. That quick no, everybody in the industry appreciates that.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that's just a really, really important aspect of it.
Yeah, we used to talk about, the order of how you ask the questions back in the day when I was at a carrier about, get the industry code at the top because if it's dynamite manufacturing, we don't want it. Now maybe somebody in here wants dynamite manufacturing. Liberty Mutual did not. But it's like, an early no is the best no. Yeah. There's nothing worse than a late decline, especially because it's a relationship business. Yeah. Absolutely.
And to your point of changing appetite, right, and changing guidelines, one of the interesting insights that we kind of based our company on was your underwriting strategy doesn't have to change real time. It doesn't have to change frequently. But what the actions are that underwriters are taking to achieve that strategy, those change all the time, right? Let's take an example. Let's say you're a carrier and you're saying, I don't want something really simple. I don't want to write more than $100 million of total insured value in California, just making something up, right? Well, if you're currently at $10 million, your underwriters are good to go, right? They can just go, right, in California, and it's not a problem, right? Now you're at 99, the actions that underwriters are going to have to take are very different. They should probably not be writing in California anymore. Your underwriting guidelines, your underwriting strategy hasn't changed. It's always been $100 million in California, right? But what the underwriters have to do changes. So the recommendations you give them change.
Yeah.
And this is a simple example, and it might sound silly, right? It's very easy to follow. But now think about you have 50 of these guidelines, and your underwriters are sitting in different offices. That affects each other. Who knows? Maybe my colleague at the other side of the US has just underwritten $50 million in California. If I don't know about that, I'm going to accumulate, right? And so that sort of strategy, right, and thinking about, hey, not just my strategy might not change, but my next best action for the underwriters does change all the time, right? And finding software that gives those recommendations to the underwriters that is dynamic and in real time adapting to what is actually happening in your underwriting world, like that's really key.
Yeah, that's really a key point because everybody's running really fast and you all have to know what each other's doing just somehow magically. And you have to know, do you go or do you stop? So let's just kind of start decomposing the underwriting process itself. And let's talk about things like submissions, appetite, risk analysis. Why do we need to rethink them? And how do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, starting with submission intake. For whatever reason, for the last 10 years, we've thought that submission intake is just about extracting documents. And I don't think that could be more wrong. Yes, there is a concept of, okay, I get a core forms, or I get an SOV, right, a statement of values, or I get some vehicle or equipment list, right, and I need to extract that so that I can quote it, right, or I can rate it. And yes, you need to get the data out, but thinking about that document by document, and then not thinking about triaging, but it's just extracting, it's just, you're kind of just automating that process, but not really generating any value, right? And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of interest and where I think it could be really important. Why are we, because a lot of these times you spend money per document, right? So you pay per document. Why are we paying per document if we can already know, like 10 seconds in, a human would know, hey, this is not even an appetite. I don't even want to work on this. Why are we doing that? That doesn't make any sense, right? And so what we started thinking about, well, why don't we, with the kind of more human reasoning that LLMs can bring, why don't we reason over the entire submission first, which is very cheap, right? You then decide, hey, is this an appetite or is this not an appetite? If it is an appetite and it is high winnable, okay, now we can go through the process. Now we can go and extract exactly all information. Maybe you need to run some OCR at that point, right? Or you run it offshore. But why don't we take that step first so that we reduce all the junk that comes in and we're not paying for all these submissions that we kind of knew we're not going to work on in the first place, right? And so that gets back to that triaging idea of triage. The earlier you triage, the more, the faster you're going to react and the more cost you're going to save yourself, right? So moving that triage forward and thinking more about triage instead of intake, I think is really key, a key change, because otherwise you're just going to win bad deals faster.
Yeah.
Right?
And process a lot for processing's sake
exactly.
Versus not processing for value. Because I at one point I had the team that did the manual email box stuff, and I had to put my best and brightest people on that because they needed to do exactly what you described. Look at this, New England speak, wicked fast, and say, what is it? Do we want it? And do I have enough to start moving it forward, or do I need to reach back and either go research and find the missing information or something that was forbidden at the time, actually go back and ask the sender what they meant to tell us? We weren't allowed to do that. So I had to have people who would figure out what were the fill in the blanks in a way that was not going to unintentionally affect things like appetite, pricing, product. So I had to have former underwriters and former raters and product specialists on those mailboxes.
Yeah, no, exactly. And what you're saying is exactly right? If you look at document by document, you look at an email submission coming in, you're going to miss the concept of the submission, right? You're going to miss that information that is in the body. How many times have I seen an email from a broker that says, hey, the equipment list is attached. Oh, by the way, please also include the vehicles of the owner and do this and that, right? Well, if you just look at the equipment list and that's what you're basing your submission intake on, you're going to miss all of that really key information that's going to massively change how you assess this, right? And so you have to reason across the submission. You can't just look document independently.
Yeah. And so appetite, risk and now some of the other processes. How should we be thinking about those?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, right, it's something that doesn't need to change in real time, but the actions you're taking to achieve it is real time.
Yeah.
With more data being available, you have to start thinking about how do I provide this data to my underwriters? And that's really difficult, right? I mean, this is kind of the reason we started was so I was in natural catastrophe modeling. I was a mathematician doing all sorts of research, and mathematics, modeling these events. And I looked at insurance and I saw the coverage gap increasing exponentially, right? Like just an exponential amount of people and businesses are not able to get insurance anymore. And what I thought really naively was, okay, we just need better catastrophe models, right? If only we had a better wildfire model, we'd be better able to predict it, and insurers would be able to better price it, and we're all happy, right? Well, so I started looking around and look at the wildfire models, and I was actually kind of impressed, right? It was actually not bad. And we were doing pretty good at predicting those wildfires. So if that's the case, then why are we struggling so much with the coverage gap, right? Why is that increasing so quickly? And then I started looking at what is going on in insurance. Well, they generate this whole wildfire score, then put them into an underwriting guideline, a PDF of 100 pages. We then sent them to underwriters to be like, every time you get a submission, you look at this long guideline and you read it, and then we just hope and pray that they understand it and take better action. Well, let's be honest, right? That's just not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so what we figured out is like we have to be more dynamically. You have to capture your appetite not in a PDF. You have to capture it in the same software as where your underwriters live. It's the only way to do it.
Yeah.
Right? Like where the underwriters are actually, where the rubber meets the road, like that's where you also have to capture your appetite and your guidelines. Otherwise, you're never going to connect the dots with the underwriters and never change your strategy, like in the way you have to think about it. So
Yeah.
I think we have to stop thinking these as separate things and
Yeah.
create that process. You just have to do them like together.
Yeah, it's integrating everything regardless of kind of organizationally who's doing what. Because sometimes you'll have, kind of the submissions in one part of the organization, portfolio might be kind of a separate piece of the underwriting organization, and then the actual underwriters, the actual kind of frontline forces. But they all need to be somehow kind of like wired. They all need to be operating in this cycle together versus three separate channels that you hope will ever intersect. So we talked about several areas here. So let's think about building an underwriting strategy. How do you believe an underwriting organization can identify the changes that would offer the most value?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest struggle still is getting all the data in one place, right? I mean, we have all sorts of ideas and operations that we want to do with the data, but oftentimes the first challenge is, well, I don't have all the data in one place. And it's a really interesting concept. There's been a lot of work around federated learning, right? So being able to learn models or to train machine learning models across different sources without necessarily moving all the data to one data lake, right? And so that's where these sorts of things can be really interesting because it makes it a lot easier to train those models and get those sorts of insights without the big data lake project that everybody's scared about, right? Now, there's a lot of tools that make it actually a lot easier to get data into one place, and we're becoming a lot better at that, reasoning across that, but it's still difficult. I mean, the amount of mainframe databases I have seen with columns where the column names of these databases are just field A, field B, field C, and I'm just looking at it and being like, well, what does that mean, right? And then one that turns out to be the premium and the other one, right? It's a challenge, right?
Yep.
And you're never going to figure that out. You're always going to have to sit down with whoever is the subject matter expert and be like, okay, what does this mean, right? And actually map it out. Now, again, once you do that, you can get all that information. It's not a technology problem anymore, right? It's just a knowledge problem, right? It's just a social problem. Who has this information, right? And I think that's the thing that we still have to solve for.
Yep.
But ultimately, that's how I think about doing that properly.
Yeah.
And then once you have that, that's where those feedback loops become really important, right? So that's where having the underwriters live in the exact same place as where the underwriting strategy is determined is really important. And then making sure that you have a modern system that automatically captures a lot of that data. You want the interaction data to be automatically captured. Right? You can't just have a system that captures the data of just policies and premiums. You have to know how many times are my underwriters clicking on these buttons? How many minutes are they spending looking at certain accounts? How long are they taking to write up a referral? If you're not capturing that sort of information right now, you're behind.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's just a really important aspect, and you can use that again to drive into the feedback loop. To just give you one example, we had a customer, they'd implemented referral rules, right? Pretty simple. They had said, hey, on these certain accounts that have this specific roof type, the underwriters need to go and get a referral. They looked at all the data in Federado, and they saw 99% of the time we're approving these referrals within an hour. So what did they do? They just removed the referral rule, right? Why do we have a referral rule if 99% of the time it's approved within an hour? Like, it doesn't make sense, right? So that is the sort of data and the sorts of insights you have to capture, because otherwise you're not going to move your strategy forward, and you're going to keep building those sorts of rules that, quite frankly, don't really make any sense, right?
And that's a great example of kind of in its totality is, at any point in time as you're trying to propel forward and you're looking like, how do we get the work done today? I would envision it would be hard for anyone to say how much of that is how we intend to do it going forward versus historically how we've done it up to this point in time. A workaround, because the system that we had didn't let us, so we tried to figure. It's a lot of kind of mishmash things all kind of wound against each other. And so I think it's really powerful and empowering to challenge everything, to say, and there's no judgment. I always work on the premise, anything that you're doing now was implemented because at a point in time, it added value and it was important. But things change, things move on. Certain things you don't need to do that anymore. And maybe even behind the scenes, that's actually been automated, so now you're inadvertently doing it twice. But it's really to challenge the status quo. And as more and more solutions have come to market that have accumulated the experience of working with all of you over the many decades, more and more it's kind of less about the design of how you do it, but what's your intended goal? What are you trying to accomplish, and say to the solution provider, how does your system support this? It may be a different approach than what you were thinking or the design or maybe how you do it today, but the how doesn't matter. It's how you get there that does in most instances, and just opening your mind, although it's a big change management course, just opening your mind to thinking differently. And if I could put you on the spot, and I mentioned this during our preparation conversation, is a year or two, I think, you wrote a blog about kind of the whole data top. I'm going a little off script here, but I loved this blog. It's how I found you before I got a chance to work with you, is rethinking your approach on kind of normalizing your data, kind of the avoiding the boil the ocean moments.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a really interesting concept where every carrier I speak to has some sort of data ontology themselves, right? A data schema, a way to structure all their data, right? And one of the things we realized is, why are we trying to do that one carrier by carrier? Why are we not trying to learn across and come up with a sort of a standardized schema, right? And that's ultimately what we did, to really think about, okay, how do we store this? It kind of gets back to this idea of this, you don't need a data lake necessarily to do what you need to do with the data, right? And you can federate it, right? You can apply federated learning techniques to do what you need to do with it. But if you have that standardized schema that you're thinking about, and it's actually something that's learned across the industry, right, and something that makes sense for that regard, I think you can really move forward. And actually, many years ago, Accord did kind of a similar thing, right, where they thought, okay, hey, how can we capture this all? And they ended up doing it in PDFs like Accord forms, right, which was great at the time, but now obviously we're in a much more digital workflow and thinking more about, okay, how do we store this in a database, right? And so we have to kind of take the next step there.
Yeah.
But I think that's really what the key point was about that.
Yeah. And I think part of it was, again, it was back to the, kind of iteratively go through it. The data that you need, and you're grabbing across a whole bunch of disparate systems and database in the back end, and you want to unify it together to, for your portfolio, to analyze, grab those and go, and then grab the next and go, and just start kind of peeling off those layers as you need them, as opposed to, again, I hear this often, well, we first have to normalize all of our data before. I'm like, oh gosh, no, please don't. Because, you have to let it be need driven about how you do it, so you can really start iteratively catching that value, making those changes incrementally.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, it's funny because I've just seen so many implementations of software, right? And oftentimes it's like heart surgery, right? You have to really go and go really deep. We always go and sit with business, and business goes, oh, this is going to be a real challenge because you're going to need all this data and it lives in all these places. Then we go to IT of our customers and they say, oh, this is awesome. We have our data lake. We just finished it. We can use it. And then we go and ask business, okay, well, what data exactly do we need, right? What are you using to determine your appetite? And then we go, okay, that's great. We have all this data. We have a big, easy data list. Go back to IT and say, okay, this is the data we need. You said we can get it out of the data lake. It's like, oh, well, these data points we don't have in the data lake. It's like, I thought the data lake was ready, right?
Yeah.
And so I understand, right? That makes a ton of sense, right? Because it's really hard to do that well. But I think to Meredith's point, and kind of the point of that article is, do that iteratively, right? Go and figure out what is data. You don't need to get all the data in that data lake, right? Just figure out what is the data we need for this specific thing. Just do that.
Yeah.
Just only do that, right? One at a time.
And it's an incredible opportunity to learn as quickly as you can how to do it and then test your theory. We did this because we had a premise, this data would enable us to improve something by X amount, and then say, and is that true? And if not, why not? It was a well-informed premise. Let's dig deeper to say, and that might say, oh, because there's actually one additional piece of data we need. And again, you're getting that value and you're learning both from a business perspective and from a technical perspective on the how do you do it depending on the 10, 20, however many systems that you're trying to integrate from a data perspective. So when it comes to finding, a lot that we've been talking about and we've been hearing, it speaks to my heart, is that it's not about technology. It's all about people, and then it's about process. And technology is the enabler. It's the tail. It's not the dog. So what are the guiding principles that that you see is really key to make sure that we think about as we go down this path of maximizing the power of technology, maximizing the power of AI, Gen AI, Agentic AI, all those things. Okay, but how do you make sure that you still keep the person in the loop where the person belongs, or I'd say where your customer or distribution partner would like them to be?
Yeah, we have a saying at Federado. It is businesses don't have problems, people do, right? We always talk about like, oh, we need to increase our hit ratio. We need to do this metric. And I always ask like, okay, who is the person who is facing this problem? Who is the person who is not enabled to make the right decisions to actually make this a better thing, right? And so always ask that question, like, who is the person who we're doing this for? Right? Who am I solving this problem for? And really like point out someone in your organization, not just a title, like a name, right? And I think once you have that, you're going to have so much more clarity to understand what they're doing, right? This is just to kind of tell you a little bit about how we started and what the kind of the starting point was. When Will and I, my co-founder, started, it was mid-COVID, it was 2020. And we spent like 6 months, we locked ourselves up in the middle of nowhere in Idaho, and we were like, we were going to learn about underwriting.
In Idaho.
Yeah, in Idaho. Long story, but it didn't matter. And we loved the hiking in the weekends and just the learning over the week. What we did is we spent 6 months just every week, week in, week out, day in, day out, asking underwriters, right, real people across the whole insurance space, what are your problems, right? What does your life look like? What are you doing? Why do you think these are problems, right? And about 5 months in, underwriters started asking us, and we were just mathematicians, right? Underwriters started asking us, hey, for how long have you guys been underwriters? And I was like, well, I'm not an underwriter, but clearly I'm starting to speak like one, right? I've become one of them, right? And I think that's the moment, I think, when we realize, hey, we have learned enough at this point, right, that we can actually start thinking about maybe solutions. But before that, we haven't thought about any solutions whatsoever, right? And so I think I give that example because it's so important to really, really understand who are the people, right, and how do you actually learn from them before you even start thinking about solutions. And you don't need to take 5 months, right? But that level of understanding, I think, is key to doing it right.
Yeah, and this is a huge change management journey, and I believe there's an inverse proportion of the more exciting the destination, the steeper the hill to get there. And so you have to, and I heard a lot about transparency in the conversations that I was part of yesterday, and being really transparent up front with your underwriters of where are you trying to get to and why, and what does it mean to them? Because you've got the research yesterday. The majority of what we're seeing, and from multiple sources, is Jacobson just released their Q1 2025 annual industry or their quarterly hiring research, and said most carriers are looking to add staff, and the predominant reason why is to grow. And so everyone's looking, and they want to hire experienced underwriters. So first off, you've got competition for your talent. It's a competitive space as you have that retirement flux. So the key is, absent you saying why you're heading down this journey, where if you're exploring or you're already in the midst of and deploying more automation into your underwriting process, if you don't kind of give them a heads up on the why, they will assume it's to cut headcount. They just will. As opposed to what we hear is, well, it's actually to be able to quote faster, write more business, be more precise, be more profitable, win the right deals first, all those types of things, being sure they understand that, and then updating their objectives accordingly as you make those changes. So we'll see if we can kind of go fast. We've got 5 minutes. The clock is flashing weird numbers at me, but I got the 5-minute warning. Yeah, it's a little frenetic down here. It says 9, by the way. So I can't not have you touch on what I think is we're in the hype cycle of agentic AI. Here we go. And it's not about agents, by the way. It's just really confusing for insurance people.
It is actually.
And Mark and I don't call it agentic. Too late, they did. So kind of what do you advise the audience to be thinking about that, or should they pause a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's important to pause a little bit. I think it's important to understand what it actually means in the first place, right? Because I know that there's a lot of kind of definitions going around. It's actually very well defined. You can read it online. Perplexity has been kind of the company who started this, and they have a really clear definition on the website. Definitely encourage you to read it. But it's kind of been a transition from workflows to agents, right? Workflows everyone is kind of has seen before, right? Remember when you call, let's say you call United, right? Because you need to change your flight or something like that. You always go through the options, right? 1, you want to change this. 2, oh, you have a problem with it, right? So that's kind of a workflow, right? It's well defined what the steps are, right? If you press this button, you go this path. If you go this button, you go this path, right? Agents are kind of the next level of that. Agents are sort of, I guess, agents, right? Or systems that don't have a well-defined path, but they have tools. And these tools, the agent determines themselves, right, or the model determines themselves, what is the tool I'm going to use, right? So there's no logical, if this, then go through this path. It is more okay, based on the context I have, I should use this tool. And a tool could be something like a web search. A tool could be something like generating a document. A tool could be presenting information back to you, right? It could be a whole range of things, but ultimately that's what an agent is, right? And then what's really interesting about agents is that it's not just a one and done, right? They learn from their context. So what's really important is that when these agents are taking tools, they're actually affecting their environment. They're affecting your behavior, right? They're affecting what you're going to do next when they take that action. And they're learning from that to then take another action, right? They have memory. Right,
yeah.
is really what it's about. So that's kind of the idea of it. Now, obviously, you can see a lot of value in that. I would say if you can, and it works, go back to your workflows.
Yeah.
Right? It's better. It's more deterministic, right? It's less random. And so if you can do that, use your workflows. Agents are used for very complex tasks. And one could argue 10 years from now, 5 years from now, they're going to take over underwriting in full. We'll have to see.
Yeah.
They're kind of fit into that more complex task where you don't necessarily know what the tools you're going to use. But I also, as I said, think underwriting is a very relationship-driven business. And I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I'd say, let's have this conversation next year. And because this is what we had with Gen AI. In Gen AI 2023, it was woo, insert magic here. And then, last year it got real and practical. And so I think, this year will be the year of kind of going past the hype and starting to getting into the reality of where it fits. We have, 1 minute? 1 minute? 2 minutes. Okay, so 2 minutes, just kind of closing advice to our audience on how to sort through all of the ever emerging kind of AI solutions to improve underwriting?
Talk to people where the rubber meets the road, right? Figure out like what do they actually need. Honestly, spend a day working like them, right? Like the amount of times, like I personally still full time always lead one implementation for Federato because I want to know how do we do it, right? And I don't want to lose that, right? And it's so helpful because you really learn what are the things where people are spending time. You'd be surprised the silly things people still do, right? That could easily be automated. Start with those things.
Yep.
Like just speak to the people who are the end users of what you're inventing. That's the core thing I would give as advice.
Yeah, I love that. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
We ran out of time. We were going to open to questions, but you can stalk him and find him for the rest of the duration. So thank you again, and thank you very much. Really, really appreciate it.